But wait, you may cry. This show is supposed to be dumb. Indeed it is. But unfortunately, Akiba's trip's most egregious absurdity lies not with its premise, but instead with a specific scene from its first episode that cannot be forgiven, and whose stupidity I feel obligated to point out here. As it stands, that absurdity of its premise is kind of the point. Although changing the weakness of their enemies from what it was in the two Akiba's Trip games was a big misstep in my eyes. It wasn't as if the excuse to get people stripped down to their undergarments wasn't already pretty barefaced, but going from their weakness being exposure to sunlight to an exposure to air strains suspension of disbelief incredibly close to the breaking point, even in the context of an excuse to show skin. Surely the skirts and leotards worn by some of the bugged ones don't offer much in the way of airtightness. In general, this premise also just falls a bit short overall when compared to something like Keijo, which, as I detailed in my video on the series, manages to empower its women in a number of ways through its contrived premise to show off their sex appeal, instead of that appeal being driven by a victimization of them as it is in this show. Let's get to the real issue here though, this scene. So we start off with Matome about to finally get killed by the leader of this group of bugged ones she's been fighting. The stake that's going to be put through her heart, a neat if somewhat puzzling callback to the vampiric weakness to light of the enemies in the video games. Not unpredictably, our protagonist Tamotsu jumps in between Matome and the stake in an act of self-sacrifice. The attacker's response to this is quite puzzling, because turning into a bugged one supposedly makes you lose your mind and simply become a raging, almost zombie-like creature seeking to infect others, and yet she seems somewhat taken aback by having inflicted such a significant wound on Tamotsu. She calls Matome a traitor, so maybe the two of them are some kind of self-aware bugged ones, which could allow her to get rattled by her own actions, but she was willing to do that same thing to Matome, and she'd want to rob Tamotsu of his mind by turning him into a bugged one as well, so there's still really no grounds for her to be particularly upset or unnerved here. All that oddity aside, in response to this, Matome punches a hole through the floor to escape with Tamotsu, and after saying, "Damn it, let's go," their attacker turns and starts running off in the other direction, so it seems like she was shaken to the point where she's gonna let them go for now. Strange, but with her motivations and mindset being so vague and seemingly contradictory, most decisions from her at this point would be. What follows is about a minute and a half of some comically self-aware melodrama from Tamotsu, and then Matome saving him by turning him into a bugged one like her, exactly what we all saw coming. Wait, what? No, hold on, what? Back that shit up, show it to me again. Right. So as you all saw, it is at this point that our gang of baddies decides to drop through the hole in the roof made by Matome in order to confront her. What is this bullshit? I'll tell you what it is. It's bullshit! It is plot. It all makes sense when you think it through. The plot of this episode is that Tamotsu gets stabbed, and then Matome makes out with him for half a minute in order to give him superpowers and save his life. The only way for that to occur is for them to have a few minutes of safety after he gets stabbed. And so Cat Ears and friends ran off screen and then patiently waited that minute and a half before it was their turn to be in the plot again, finally jumping down after Matome once that time came. Don't you see? Nothing out of the ordinary here, officer. Just the plot moving along as it needs to. Watching this scene, I was reminded of a very similar one from the Asterisk War.
Ayato then finally makes his show-stopping entrance, easily laying waste to the robots which grabbed Euless and then carrying her up through a hole in the ceiling. Please keep in mind that not only did all of the robots descend from this very hole in the first place, but that we're about to see them all jump up back through the hole in about a minute. And yet for some reason, Euless and Ayato are able to carry out an entire minute of conversation in the time that it takes for Silas to pursue them up through the hole. He even asks, "Are you done talking?" as if he was giving them breathing room on purpose.
Who are they fooling here? Actually, don't answer that one. The idea that some people would get fooled by this is too depressing. Who are they trying to fool here? With the Asterisk War, it at least made some small degree of sense, because being an adaptation of a light novel, this is a scene that, while still unlikely to actually work out logically if you thought about it, at least is far less conspicuous, on account of you not actively feeling the time it takes for their dialogue to occur passing. A similar phenomenon often happens in manga adaptations, where dialogue that must be spoken while the fighters just stand there awkwardly feels way more out of place than it does when it technically occurs in the single instant that a manga panel captures. There's no source material fucking with Akiba's strip here. Based on the video games it may be, but this anime is following a totally original story, and as a result this is purely an instance of incompetent filmmaking. You may protest my labeling of it as the dumbest thing in anime, But honestly, the expression to the audience by the show that it just wants this conversation to happen here, and can't be asked to come up with a reasonable circumstance in which it would. So it's just going to have these antagonists run away for a bit until it's ready to call them back in is mind-blowingly blatant in its laziness, creative bankruptcy, and lack of regard for its audience's intelligence, in a way that nothing else in anime has really been to me. Of course, all that being said, this is already a series whose stupidity you're accepting as inherent to it the second you start watching, and whose plot doesn't really matter at all. This episode features a ton of really kinetic and weighty fight scenes that had solid choreography, so if the series can keep that up, it will still be worth the watch for those who are interested in that. And it isn't like those who cared that much about anime being well crafted from a writing standpoint would likely have been sticking around for it anyway. This is just something I needed to vent my incredulity over, and also keep an eye out for more of in the future. Now that my monologue scene has wrapped up here, I'd love for you to jump down into this video's description, where you'll find a link to the Patreon that enables me to make these videos. I've got 2 larger projects nearing completion, but thanks to Goose, Chelsea Chester, Joji Matthews, Culver James Kamai, Chris Wagner, and all of my other patrons, I've got the time to put together smaller projects like this alongside them.